So up next, we have our second power-packed keynote speech on hybrid cloud skills, talent, and wisdom by engineer John Morton, enterprise architecture and data governance expert, digital transformation, CPM. The stage is all yours, Engineer Morton. Over to you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Roger. I'm just sharing my screen. And is that available? Can you see it all?
Yes, we can see it. If you could put it on presentation mode, Mr. Morton. Yes, perfect. Yes.
I'm afraid it's the latency as it goes across many different clouds environments. So
yes.
Thank you for the introduction. This isn't going to be a technical discussion around the technical skills. I think previous speaker Badar outlined a whole range of different technical skills and some of the challenges that you have in developing those technical skills to take your team from where they are, probably an on-premise only type environment, to a much broader, how do you deal with the cloud? But unsurprisingly, cloud, when we talk about hybrid cloud, we sometimes just think it's about using the private cloud and the public cloud. But already within your organization, within your environment, there are tendrils out to a much more diverse set of shared services. Usually HR and payroll are already provided through a software as a service. You might have some of your services and some of your capabilities delivered through privately software as a service managed cloud providers. In some cases, your business intelligence analysis. In others, it may be carrying out commercial billing and pricing information. And of course, we cannot forget about our end users who sit within factories, within hospitals, within offices. We have to deal with intelligent buildings and understanding how people are using intelligent buildings. And of course, wearable devices, whether you're in law enforcement or whether you're a doctor walking on a ward. You have your own set of local compute and edge computing technologies that need to be integrated into your overall hybrid cloud. So at first sight, it seems that we live in a much more more complex environment than we did perhaps within our on-resident, on-premise site. And to some extent, it is, but to another extent, is a much more automated and simplified environment. So our world today is isolated. There's a lot of defined interfaces that sometimes have to be updated, modernized, which draws away from your IT department. There's a planned evolution for you need to plan and then take the next steps. And that in itself can be quite slow and tedious about helping the organization get that business agility to drive some innovation and to deliver on some of the promises. And some of the quick ways that people do things are not necessarily cost effective. I came across an environment where the business intelligence suite and data mining had been put on a normal infrastructure, cloud infrastructure, which meant that it didn't take advantage of high data throughput capabilities. Now, that doesn't sound as though it's a major problem, except that they were paying about $5,000 a month for something which, when we switched it over, it was about $500 a month. So it makes a huge difference just making sure that you understand the right workload, the right architecture topologies, and the right computing requirements that are needed for the different workloads that you've got. So some of the new challenges within this environment, though, is one that you have already seen in the previous diagram. It's an integrated, it's a broader ecosystem. And surprisingly, the business keeps moving, IT keeps moving, so it becomes a continuous evolving environment that is quite dynamic in itself. So one of the things that we need to be able to do as professionals is make sure that we have the robustness in place, security and data protection, and that we can trade off the different workloads from some of the different applications and products that we are using within our infrastructure. ERP systems, different modules work in extremely different ways. And if all put on the one environment, it's quite easy to manage and control, but actually it could be more costly than if you took a more holistic view of what is it that we're using the ERP system for. And the computing models are more varied, which gives you more opportunity to be able to flex how you meet the demands of your workforce, your business, your organization, and of course, your own internal innovation and research and development into how can I help the business more. I've added there one specific challenge from about 5 or 6 different compute cloud environments. One of the areas that seems to be managed in a very discrete way currently is identity management and identity controls. And this isn't just about asset management. This is also about employees, about contractors, about your suppliers within the supply chain. So getting your identity management and security in place for how you're going to deal with, interact, share information is a big challenge, which you can then use the tooling that you get within the cloud environment to help you with. So let's turn this into a little bit of where are the new challenges? So risk, data ownership, supply chain and data value chain, the workload assessment, which has been talked about in the opening panel and in the last speaker, edge computing models, and then making sure you've got the right resilience, reliability, and security. So within your environment, one of the challenges you've got is to look at the trusted and untrusted nature of the different environments that you've got and put in place how you interact with them so that you can monitor, manage, and control those interfaces in an appropriate way. And that's very different for each organization about how they wish to control that and manage it, and for different applications. And in fact, one company is doing its utmost to make sure that they can put as much of their information and as much of their applications in an open and untrusted environment, which means that they don't have to put the security around it, and gives them a much cleaner, nicer focus on just a few applications and a few data sources that they really need to keep secure and manage. And that has reduced the cost of a lot of the security infrastructure for them to make sure that works. Another added advantage of moving to the cloud. They're also in a business where they have extreme growth and shrinkage of workload demand, both seasonal and at the weekends. And therefore, they needed that sort of growth from the public crowd at as low a cost point as they could get. The other key element, and this has been spoken about earlier on, is about where your data is being processed and who the data ownership is and who is the data processor. And making sure that you have clear policies, guidelines, and governance across that is one of the key things that becomes much more evident as part of moving to the cloud and understanding the interactions and the engagement that you have between your private systems and where your processing is going on. At one of the companies that I was working with, they thought they actually even owned the data. In fact, they wanted to own the data. It was being caught on their premises. It was being processed by a third-party provider. However, when they looked at the contracts, they realized that they didn't have ownership of the data. The provider offered them to pay for it at a couple of million a year. And they decided to renegotiate the contracts. It took them about a year. But in the renegotiating of the contracts, they also built the system to then analyze the information and data. So at the end of the year, they had full access to all of the data, and they had the applications tried and tested so that they could then give a bottom line return to the organization. But it's one of those things that you have to go back to the contracts to work out whether you actually own the data that, in their case, was key to some of the profitability that their organization had. It also, because they were examining it, they also came up with much simpler ways to handle the workload in a public cloud, taking away an awful lot of the privacy concerns that had been wrapped around it by the various managed service providers who were running it. And then lastly, here we go. When you start to look at your organization and start looking at the ecosystem, either from a data supply chain or from an ordinary supply chain, whether you're in food stuffs, the farm, through all of the distribution mechanisms, packaging mechanisms out to fork, or whether you're in mining, from digging coal or iron from out of the ground all the way to the autonomous delivery to a port, or when you're looking at the lab and the production of pharmaceuticals, all the way through to how those pharmaceuticals are being destroyed, incinerated, you start to realize that your visibility, the transparency, the audit, and the risk that you bear within your company is actually, sometimes the risk elements are much further down the chain, and understanding where in the chain those risks are and putting in place the right visibility and audit means that as an end-to-end business, you can get a better understanding of your suppliers and your customer needs, so that together all of you can look at greater profitability, look at how you can be more competitive in your marketplace, and how you can actually deliver something that is trusted by your end citizens. And we've seen this in a number of industries, especially in retail industry and foodstuffs. So hybrid cloud has actually been helping that, because it provides common set of standards, open capabilities that allow you to integrate the data together and bring it to closure. So what are the critical areas for talent growth? Well, as you've seen, that any of your team at the moment are going to have to deal with greater complexity, and they're going to have to take into account more factors about the risk, the criticality of systems, and the threats. One of the key things there is about that criticality. As you start to move applications and consolidate applications into the cloud, one of the real jumps out at you is suddenly that application was just running one factory and all of the controls in that factory. And the business is quite happy to allow that factory to, slow down a bit if that application fails. But now that application could be running 15 factories or 20 factories because you've consolidated the application, and therefore the criticality and the need for it becomes much more mission critical. So there's a challenge to make sure that as you're looking at the migration and the movement of your systems and applications to a cloud environment, what is the mission criticality? What's the mission criticality of the interfaces to other systems as well, especially if those other systems are being provided by your suppliers or third parties? The depth of knowledge and skills, I think everybody said that, yes, there's an awful lot more technical skills, but it's actually more about the methods and the approaches, how scaling can be done, whether linear scaling or vertical scaling is the right approach, and what is the right compute frame in which to do that scaling. Principles of IT become much more in focus around the computing models, around workloads and workload management for certain types of transactions. And that means that you need to understand the processes, their interactions, and how they fit within your existing deployment, which means that you need to look at the release controls. It's no use changing something in a factory or in an office environment if the back-end systems cannot control, manage, or interpret the new information flows. So an awful lot more work needs to be done and thought about as part of the interoperability between front-end processing, edge compute processing, and back-end processing. And you also need your people to become much more conscious of, what are the costs of running this? And a great way to do this is to put together what's called a sandbox of various compute models, capabilities, and application stack that you can allow your technical experts to evaluate the various process models against the cost value analysis, or to allow them to do some of that financial modeling around the capabilities of the different compute models to meet the different interactions. As we saw earlier, collaboration, interaction, and engagement is key, and the communication of that, but also the influence you need to have to communicate to the rest of your team, your stakeholders, to your partners, what is going to be acceptable, and to challenge some of the things that the business might be asking you to do and what they might not be asking you to do. And this particular one, I've had the unfortunate or the fortunate opportunity of helping teams develop. But one challenge on that was that sometimes the individuals, once they realize what it means, the risk that they're taking on, the influence that they need to have, that can have a real showstopper for them. So just finishing, so leadership in a hybrid cloud demands professional skills, accountability, and responsibility. So you need to be able to develop your team to have greater accountability for what they are managing. And one parting thought, does your skill framework, methodology, and talent assessment support your cloud strategies? Thank you. That's the end of my presentation. If there's time, Roger, happy to take a question or two.
Right, John. So far we haven't received any questions. If we do receive any questions, we would definitely go ahead and send them to you and you can answer them, right? Thank you, John, for your insightful keynotes, and I'm sure our eminent delegates would have definitely benefited from your gracious keynote speech this afternoon. Thank you once again, and please do enjoy the rest of the day.